Tom Cowan, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm super excited for our conversation. We had a chance to meet very briefly at an event that we both attended. You were actually the keynote speaker at, and you left the crowd speechless. So this is a full circle moment for me. And I'm super, super excited to dive a little bit deeper into the work that you do and also learn about some of the ways that you think and how you approach health and how you look at things. It's so unique and fascinating and different. And I'm so excited to explore this conversation with you. Thank you for joining me today.
All right. Thank you. Glad you're find it of value, I guess. That's good.
Yeah, well, I find value in anyone who has a perspective that's new, that makes sense, that they can back up with evidence. And I know that's something that you're really, really good at. And I'm really thrilled to see where this conversation goes. The event that you were speaking at, um, the audience there was a gasp at some of the concepts that you were sharing, and it really made us kind of scratch our head and question so many of the things that are foundational in our training. And it's I'm always looking at what's disruptive when it comes to thinking. And what you presented was very disruptive to our kind of dogmatic way of looking at cells, looking at the heart, looking at parasites. And so yeah, this is going to be really cool and fascinating. So let's start with parasites. I know that you've got a very unique perspective on parasites and the role that they play in health. I'd love for you to start there and share.
Okay. This isn't something that I've spent a huge amount of time, but I have a friend. His name is Daniel Roitis, and he wrote a book called Can You Catch a Cold? The answer is basically no. But he came on to my show and gave a presentation on parasites, and then I've looked into it myself. So here's the story. And the first thing I would say to anybody listening to me is the biggest revelation in my intellectual life was when I got firmly convinced that the path to take was the path of finding claims and finding out whether they were true and not worrying about whether I knew what was true. In other words, investigating claims. So, and I could give you examples of why that's the way, that's what's called science, really. Somebody says, okay, here's the example. Somebody says there's parasites and they cause disease. That is a very specific claim. Now, I just want to point out, we're not going to talk about necessarily what might have caused that person to be sick. That's an interesting subject, and we could talk about that, but that's not relevant to the claim. There's parasites, they make you sick. Now, with parasites, there's two kinds, broadly speaking, of parasites. There's protozoa, single-celled parasites, like Babesia and the malaria parasite and schistosomiasis parasite and leishmaniasis and a bunch of other ones, right? Single-cell organisms. And then there's worms, like helminths and roundworms and hookworms. So, just to get to the punchline, um, in order for something to cause an illness, it obviously has to exist. That may sound stupid, but so the first question is, what is the evidence that these protozoa actually exist? Now, interestingly, this has been a very hotly debated topic in the early days of protozoa research, particularly about malaria. And so what happened was they would take somebody who was sick, like went to a swampy place and they got a fever and chills, etc., and they got sick, and then they would look in their blood and they would see these forms and they would say, that's what made them sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in order to be scientific about it, you would have to say, you would have to prove that that was an independent organism that somehow infected that person and then caused the symptoms. And the only way you can do that is by isolating that organism, right? and then giving that to somebody in the way that you say that it happened, like through a mosquito, and showing that it caused sickness. But what they found is that those forms were identical in people who had different kinds of illness or no illness at all. And in fact, they were basically the breakdown products of our red blood cells.
Mm.
They weren't a independent organism at all. And so when they tried to isolate them and show they caused sickness, they failed. And I would go on record right now as saying, if you can show me any study that isolated a malaria parasite and gave it to a person and caused the sickness, I will retract what I just said. But I know that study doesn't exist. And so then they go into years of the 17 stages of the malaria parasite in our blood, right? Which are just 17 different breakdown products. And then they go and say, like, well, you can't find these unless you stain them with a certain stain, and then you put them in acetone or you put them in this. And it turns out that when you do the same thing to a red blood cell, you get these identical 17 different forms.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, the conclusion is, and this is the same thing with Babesia or all the other protozoa, that there is no evidence that these are outside, free living, independent organisms that have ever been shown to make anybody sick. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if you go looking in the medical literature, as Daniel and then I have, you won't find such a thing. It's just sort of the same with viruses. They have never been shown to exist. So that's with protozoa. Now, with worms, they do exist, right? You can see them, you can isolate them. But if you if you feed them to a person in this sort of normal way, they don't cause sickness. In fact, when you actually start doing studies, it looks like they feed on dead and dying tissue. They also feed on like metallic waste in the body. And when the dead and dying tissue is gone, they go away. So, what's the role of worms? So, not protozoa have never been shown to exist. Worms have a beneficial function, just like they do in nature, right? You cut down a tree, you get worms eating the tree. Nobody says the tree has an infection or the worms killed the tree.
Hmm.
And yet we go around killing protozoa that don't exist and poisoning worms, poisoning us to kill the worms. And sometimes you see a remission of the symptoms, but that's just because if they're there cleaning up dead and dying tissue, you will get symptoms with that dead and dying tissue being eliminated from your body. That doesn't prove it was the cause of the infection. And so, bottom line is, if you want to say this organism is the cause of a certain set of symptoms, you better show a study that they took that organism and only that organism and showed that it caused those symptoms. And that's never been done.
Wow, that puts a lot of ideas on their head, and it's we've been kind of
Yes.
conditioned to think a certain way, parasite or protozoan or worm, and here's the protocol for it, and then
Yeah.
the person should feel better. But I've had experiences where you think you're doing what's right for the patient, and according to kind of the algorithm, they should be feeling better, but that's
Right.
not always the case.
It's not.
So,
And by the way, like if you take somebody who you say has parasites and you give them wormwood, right? And then they feel better. And then you say to yourself, I just proved that wormwood, they had a parasite infection. B, wormwood killed the parasites, right?
mhm.
The problem is wormwood also detoxifies your liver. That's not a problem, but that's a fact. And it helps get rid of like metals and other debris. So it may be that you just helped the person. I'm not saying the person didn't get better. I'm saying the mechanism that you say you proved or you're using or thinking was true, that does not prove it. Just like antibiotics don't prove you had a bacterial infection. And I can tell you whether it's with syphilis or strep or gonorrhea. Show me one study. Bacteria exists, unlike virus, sort of like worms and protozoa. All you have to do is show me a study that you expose a person to a culture of only bacteria and they get sick. I mean, they've put, you know, men's penises in a culture of syphilis uh, organisms. Nothing happens. Same with gonorrhea. And if you don't believe me, I don't want to hear, oh, you slept with somebody and got sick, because there's a lot of things involved in that encounter, right? A
Hmm.
lot of things. In fact, they used to treat people with syphilis with mercury, which ends up going concentrating in the vaginal secretions. And then if you have intercourse, the mercury in the vaginal secretions irritates your penis, and by the way, causes lesions which are uh, look just like syphilis. So you can't use that as an example. You just have to be clear and scientific. No, just the bacteria. Show me it caused disease, and I guarantee you won't find it. In fact, you'll find just the opposite.
So the old way of thinking seems very convenient, right? Because we can supposedly identify what the problem is, provide some sort of, either natural or pharmaceutical intervention, and then poof, the problem is gone. So I'd love to know where that way of thinking came from, and I'd also love to know what sparked your way of thinking. What was it that made you say, "Hey, this isn't quite right. This doesn't make sense to me."
I mean, a lot of medical and biological and even other thinking like that, that's when they invented the atom. And I say invent them because there's no such thing as an atom. They made that up. And this all happened in the late 1800s. They made up that we're made of cells because somebody saw cut up an onion and saw these compartments and said, every living thing is made of cells, which is a bit of a leap, you know. A
Hmm.
guy named Rudolf Virchow did that. Um, and so they started with germs make you sick, and atoms are what we're made of, and a whole lot of other things happened then. And so there was a wholesale change in the way people saw the world. Now, it so happened that this change in the way that people saw the world all were towards a certain end, which is A, believe in materialism. I don't mean money, but that we're only made of stuff. Like that's a pretty big leap right there. Because I used to ask heart surgeons, like, do you love your wife? Yes, with all my heart. If you cut up somebody's heart, do you see love in there? No. I thought you just told me that we're only made of physical things, right? There's no love thing in the heart, yet we think that. So, anyways, they convinced people that we're just a bunch of atoms that quote evolved. If we used to be slime mold and then gorillas, and now we're people, which is baloney. Um, and and so they made up this science. Now it all is towards getting people to be materialists and victims and uh, consumers of pharmaceuticals and a whole bunch of other things. So was it deliberate? I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, but it certainly promoted an agenda. So you didn't do anything, you just got this virus, and so then you have to get somebody to inject you with poison so you don't get the virus. You didn't do anything. It's just bacteria flew through the air and crawled up your nose, and so you have to take this pharmaceutical to get rid of it.
So it begs the question, where do we come from and what are we made of?
Well, like I said, I'm not necessarily here to give answers because I don't know. I don't know how we got here, but I know that the idea that if there is no documented case of one species turning into another, and the examples that are used by Darwin and everybody since have all failed. In fact, the whole theory of mutations and natural selection and guided evolution, right? There's not an example that we know of a beneficial mutation. And even more than that, if you go looking for how do you know that there's actually DNA in a living person or a living being? You will immediately have problems proving that. And what do I mean by that? So, like if I said to you, do you know how they prove that you have DNA in your tissues?
Enlighten me.
So, in other words, you don't know, right? And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know either, so I'm not picking on you. But you have all these people, lay people, scientists, biologists, doctors, medical doctors, et cetera, naturopaths that talk about genetics and epigenetics. And I say to them, uh, how did they prove that DNA exists in a living system? I don't know. Then how do you know? Why do you believe in it? Like if you don't, it's like taking your car to a mechanic and saying it won't stop, and he says, "I think there's something wrong with my brakes," and the mechanic says, What's a brake?" Right? You wouldn't, you would question that person. Like, what are you doing here? So I looked into it. How did they prove it? They take pus and they wash it and they get the nucleus and then they dry it and centrifuge it and filter it. And then they mix it with phosphoric acid and they get this precipitate and then they dry it again and precipitate it. And then they get this chemical and it's rich in phosphorus. By the way, when they did it with sulfuric acid, they got chemicals rich in sulfur.
Go
And
figure.
yeah, right. Go figure. And so then they say, so this is a new chemical, it's DNA. And if I was there, I'd say, yo, how do you know that these procedures that you didn't create something that wasn't actually there in the living system? It's like when they found testosterone. Everybody believes they have testosterone in them, right? Like you think you have test. If I said to you, how did the first guy find testosterone in a testicle? You know that?
I have no idea. No, I
Yeah,
don't.
right. So that, and again, I'm not picking on you. I just think I didn't know either. And I've been a doctor for 35 years. And somebody says, and it turns out, guy grinds up a testicle, mixes it with chemicals, centrifuge it, dries it, blasts it, and then he precipitated it with acetone 7 times because the guy who did it 6 times didn't get anything pure. Now I'm thinking to myself when I read this, because I go back and read these things. So here you are in a lab, and you know that this other guy, he did it with acetone 6 times and he didn't get anything. So you're thinking, I know what the problem is. I'm going to do it 7 times.
Was there somebody that did it 8 times? Just
No, well, 7 times he got it, and then he got a Nobel Prize for isolating testosterone. And that became the proof that there was testosterone. And here's the thing. If you say to him, you have to, there's such a thing as controls, right? So if you say that you have to mix it with acetone 7 times, did you mix something else with acetone 6 times? Did you not use acetone? No, if you don't use acetone, you can't find it. How do you know that the acetone didn't make something appear that wasn't already there, wasn't actually there? The answer can only be, I have no idea. Now, it could be that there's no way to find that out, right?
Mhm.
if you can't find it without doing those uncontrollable steps, you have to then have the integrity and honesty to say, we can't know whether you have this chemical in you or not. Now, I'm not saying that testicles don't do anything. I'm just saying that the idea that they work through a chemical is a unscientific assumption. And so I don't believe it anymore. Now, if
So what?
somebody proves it, that's fine. But right now, I don't buy it.
So when somebody orders blood work, right, and they go to the doctor, they order labs, their testosterone comes back low, which what the hell are they even measuring? And then
They're
they
using a chemical procedure which they've been able to standardize that if you take a blood and you mix it with this chemical and this chemical and this chemical, you get a color change which we assume is related to this chemical called testosterone.
so then if they then give somebody testosterone replacement therapy, which seems to be all the rage these days, um, what exactly? I mean, and that person hypothetically feels better, or sees an improvement in their condition. What is happening there from your perspective?
So here's the question I would ask. Does giving somebody a chemical and having them have a change in how they feel prove that the problem was a deficiency in the chemical?
Not necessarily.
Right. In other words, somebody could be sad and you give them some cocaine and then they feel a lot better. So otherwise then you know they had a cocaine deficiency. So what that tells you is the fact that you give them testosterone and they felt better doesn't prove they had a testosterone deficiency. It doesn't even prove there was testosterone there any more than giving somebody cocaine proves that they had a cocaine deficiency or cocaine is in us. Therefore, you have to go back and do the science and prove there's testosterone in you and prove that this is the only thing you're testing for, and they can't do that. So they use all kind of surrogate things. Now maybe there's some energetic frequency in your testosterone, which when you do those things, it shows up low. And then when you give chemical testosterone, it relieves some of the symptoms. Because the problem with if thinking like that is you think, yeah, the problem is they have low chemical in them. You're back to thinking we're basically a chemistry set. And that's the problem. So they've
Mm-hmm.
suckered you into thinking all you are is a collection of chemicals. I give you this chemical, and then you're all better. Well, except you're not all better because then you feel rage and then your testicles shrink and then your hair doesn't grow like it's supposed to. And never mind, because it's pretty close, and anyways, you can still have sex.
you know this is clearly very confronting, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but it's really resonating with me because it's never quite made sense to me the way it's been explained to us. and
Yeah,
i
right.
and I've always thought, like, okay, I know I'm learning this, and I feel like, okay, everyone else is kind of jumping on this bandwagon, so there must be something to it. But when you really question it at its essence and at its source, like we are right now, it starts breaking down very quickly.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like it's it's set up in such a way that it makes it easy to industrialize and create
Yes.
algorithms around. But clearly, it's not working because we're not getting healthier as the days go by. We're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So something's amiss.
Something is amiss.
Yeah.
And it's
So
the foundation, which is you are made of chemicals, which, and then when you go and look for what is the proof that you're made of chemicals, how did you find these chemicals, whether it's insulin, estrogen, DNA, you know, it's the same with, so DNA, it's this whole thing, it's a double helix, right? Everybody knows that. So I ask people, who came up with the idea that it's a double helix? Do you know?
Watson and Crick.
Watson and Crick, 1953 paper in Nature. Next question. Again, I'm not picking on. Have you ever read the paper?
I have not. No.
Yeah, I have. I have it right here. So first thing that strikes you is there's no measurement in the whole paper. They say, and I don't want to get it because it'll take too much time. They say we assumed a rotational angle of 1.6 angstroms per whatever, which is the definition of a double helix. It's like saying I got this form in my mind and I'm assuming it's got four angles of 90 degrees. Oh my God, I found a square. No, you didn't. You made it up so that that's the definition of a square. And they didn't measure anything in the paper. They just made up that it's a double helix. And then they took this picture, which they stole from a woman named Rosalind Franklin, who took dried nucleus, did the purification like I talked about, and then exposed it to X-rays for 63 continuous hours. Now, we're told that DNA is very X-ray sensitive. You don't want to get, testicles and all that. So they take this chemical, this powder, and put it under an X-ray machine in 1952 for 63 straight hours. And then they get a picture that looks like an X. And they said, well, if you made that three-dimensional, it would be a double helix.
Hmm.
And I thought, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Because that's like, I mean, first of all, there was no proof that it was actually DNA in the first place. And then, interestingly, in the 70s, a group of postdocs at Suffolk University, they recreated the steps of the experiment to get this picture, except they started with the spring of a ballpoint pen. And they got an identical picture of an X. So I tell people, we're either our material that codes for life, it's either DNA or it's the spring of a ballpoint pen.
Hmm.
That's what we know. And I mean, this it's a
So,
joke.
so at what point did you kind of start questioning all of this? Because this is
When
like,
I was 5.
okay. But then going to medical school must have been so painful for you. Like,
No, I already knew it was nonsense. I just didn't know. I didn't know the details. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to focus on investigating claims. I kept trying to think of what's true, and it's too difficult. You know, it's like the story I tell that I stole from a friend. Guy, 18 years old, he's Asian, his parents are Caucasian. He always wondered about that. He rummages through his parents' closet and he finds adoption papers, goes to his parents, says, was I adopted? Because I never saw a picture of mom pregnant. Yes, we were waiting to tell you, right? So he knows he's adopted. Goes to his best friend says, or he says to his friend, I just found out I was adopted. I'm a little shook up and all that. Friend says, so who are your real parents? He says, I don't know. I think he got me from an orphanage in China. He says, until you tell me who your real parents are, I don't believe you were adopted.
hmm.
That's crazy, right? Because it has nothing to do with it, and he may never find out who his parents were. You know how many people I've said, there's no evidence for a chickenpox virus? And you know what they say to me? So what causes chickenpox? Like, who are your real parents? And that's not, I don't know. I mean, maybe I do know, but it has nothing to do with that question. As soon as I learned to stick with investigating claims, it's like the world opens up because you can't understand what really happens until you get rid of there's virus. There's like no room in whatever in the inn. So you just keep, I don't know, as soon as you get rid of it, you sort of hear things and open your mind up to what could have happened. That's when you start learning it. And that's kind of what I was doing, except I didn't know I was doing it until I kind of caught on. The heart isn't a pump and blocked arteries don't cause heart attacks. And I just kept going. DNA doesn't have anything to do with making proteins. And when if somebody says, "Well, how did you figure that out?" I just figured out they said DNA codes for proteins, right? Genes, one gene makes one proteins. So I looked up how many proteins there are, 200,000. How many genes? 10,000. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. Apparently geneticists don't know arithmetic because you can't have 10 genes or 10,000 genes coding for 200,000 proteins if one gene, something is wrong. And then you go looking and the whole thing is total nonsense.
It's a cosmic joke. It almost feels like it's like the
Yeah,
more
it's
we know, the less we know, and the more we believe the dogma, the further we are from what the truth is. And it kind of begs the question for me is it sounds like to me you know what's wrong, but you're not really hanging your hat on what the absolute truth is, or are you? I'd love to explore that a little bit further if that's the case.
about what?
But all of this, like, so we're taught that DNA, our proteins are coded through DNA, and if that's not the case, I mean, are you saying that proteins don't exist? Or are you saying that there's another way that proteins are coded or structures are created?
As far as I can tell, proteins do exist. I may be wrong about that, but so they must be coded by something else. Now, here I'm speculating, and I like to tell people when I'm speculating and when I'm not. Uh, but I know that organized water is a great receiver of electromagnetic information. I
Mm-hmm.
know that from a lot of experiments. So I here's the way I would put it. You see, modern science, particularly biology, but it's physics too. Physics is a load of absolute rubbish. Um, they have this. It's like I was driving when I was in California with this 3-year-old who worked in my helped me with my garden. He's 3, and I was driving with him, and somehow an interview with me came on the radio, and he looked at me and he said, "Tom, how'd you get in that radio?" And it's a good question, but I obviously wasn't in the radio. So here's modern biology. We take a radio and we say the sound has to be coming from the radio, right? Because I can hear it. So I'm going to dissect the radio, take the wires and the speakers and the plastic and the dial and everything. I'm going to find out where the sound is coming from. And you can do it atom by atom, except there's no atoms, but as small as you can get, and you will never find the origin of the sound because it's not in the radio. It's from the radio tower, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they take a person and they dissect them down to the smallest thing they can see, and they're looking for where is the proteins made. It's not there because it's in the mind of the field,
Hmm.
whatever that is. I don't know. It's like the electromagnetic field. Used to call it the ether, or some people call it God, or universal consciousness. There's a lot of names. So somehow water is a great receiver of that. So the water downloads the information that's needed to create the perfect organism. That's what happens.
I just came back from an ayahuasca retreat.
There you
And
go. You probably saw it.
And so for 4 days in a row, I drank this powerful, I don't even like the word medicine, but that's what, people
Yeah.
call it. And, it kind of shatters your reality. And it's quite fitting that we're having this conversation. So like, I almost, to be honest, I almost canceled our interview because I'm still processing from this past week, and I made the mistake of not blocking my calendar, but clearly it wasn't a mistake because we're having this conversation, and you know, it made me question everything. And
Good.
I've always been in question of everything, but I've never the thing that I've never questioned is the source that we're sounds like we're describing this, the ether, God, whatever we want to call it. And in my life, it's just that's been one continuous force for good. in my life, and I've
Yeah.
seen miracles. I've had miracles happen that could not be explained by physics or biology or the conventional ways we look at things. And it almost like these type of things get dismissed in conventional medicine because we're so convinced that it has to be biological or physical or chemical
Got
in
to be in
nature.
the radio somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm in total alignment with what you're saying. I'm probably not as articulate as expressing myself as you are, and not as decorated at expressing it either. So I'm
Yeah,
really
I got a lot of practice.
so this is like really cool to have this
It's not in the
conversation.
radio. It's somewhere in the field. And what's the
Hmm.
field? I mean, I don't, it's that's a whole big question. But
So it kind of brings me up with brings another question to mind for me is like, how do you live your life? So I'm curious as to what your day looks like, what you eat or don't eat, what your thoughts look like. I'm sure you kind of pay very close attention to those things as well.
I mean, I live on a homestead, and so I get up uh, and feed our four cats. And I make them food every morning. Like they eat, there is some packaged meat, but it's like it's like a third rabbit, a third elk meat, and then chopped up chicken livers. So I do that, and then I make the breakfast for the goats, even though they don't really need breakfast, but it's sort of a ritual we have. And then I go out so that three of the cats eat inside, one is in the outside, and then we go to the barn and feed the goats, and then we clean up the goats and all that. So that's the first thing I do every morning. And then I do some exercise. I work with a primal movement guy. I don't really like exercising, but he gets me to do it. And uh, then I eat breakfast, which is eggs either from our place, sometimes vegetables, and bread that I make from grinding einkorn flour. And I could go on. I mean, and then I do other things and do interviews or whatever, and then we feed the goats. And in the summer and spring and fall, I work in the garden. We grow 95% of our own fruits and vegetables, and that's my life.
Hmm. That's pretty,
Friends, you
yeah.
know.
And then, do you have a connection with source, like, or like, what's your relationship with God
I have a
like, if
connection
there is
with
one?
Pumpkin. He's as close to source as anything I've ever met.
Pumpkin's one of your cats or goats?
He's the original cat.
Okay, got it. Um,
In fact, I wrote a booklet called Lessons from Pumpkin, and it's amazing what I've learned from that guy because he knows a lot.
I'd love to hear some of the lessons.
Well, the first lesson, which is the most profound lesson, I think, that describes this entire thing. And so imagine this. So first of all, all our cats come and go as they please. There's like a door they can go out, and there's a whole field and woods, so it's pretty safe. And but there's coyotes and hawks and I think bears, and there's danger. And there's also food for them. They like chasing birds and mice and squirrels and rabbits. So when he goes out, he sits on the deck and looks around, right? And his ears go like this, and he sniffs the air and he wags his tail. And I think tails are electromagnetic sensing devices. And he looks around and he smells and he sits there about usually 5 to 15 minutes. And then he goes off where he wants to go, right? Now, I thought when I watched him do this every day, and I thought, what if you told Pumpkin, Pumpkin, there's a danger out there that might kill you, and it's really bad for you, but you can't smell it, see it, taste it, sense it in any way. You have no experience of this thing that's a mortal danger for you. What would happen to Pumpkin? I think what would happen is he'd run and hide under the bed. Because how does he know if this thing is going to get him? Because he doesn't smell it, he can't sense it. And then he would have trouble coming out because he doesn't know, he can't smell it. And he would smell the air and be anxious. And then his cat friends he'd start losing weight, right? And not eating right. And his cat friends would say, see, this thing got you. And he'd start worrying about it. And next thing you know, he would not be the confident, happy little guy who's confident in the world and knows where to go and what he wants to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's Americans.
Hmm.
They have all these things which they have no sense of, like viruses. But if you go out, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you don't know, but it's going to kill you. So you got to do all these things what these guys tell you to do, like wear masks, inject yourself with poisons, and not see your friends, and eat stupid stuff and all this stuff, and you're never going to know what whether it's true or not because you can't sense it. That person is toast. And we
Hmm.
have other things like, I came to realize because there's no atoms, and I can get into that, but I probably don't have time. There can't be any atomic bombs. Like that's a hoax. So we've all these people worrying about atom bombs and they're going to blow us up and we're 2 seconds to midnight. And it's all just pumpkin. There's this thing out there that's going to get you and you don't have any sense of it. Bottom line is you can't live like that. And we have like a whole laundry list of things the genes are going to get you, right? You
Hmm.
don't know anything about genes. You don't even know if they exist. You can't sense it. The tests that allegedly find them are all bogus and unscientific and but you believe it, right? So Pumpkin wouldn't believe it. He'd say, "No, I'm going with what I can smell. I think there's a bear over there. I'm not going there today."
I just had a conversation with a friend of mine, and again, just in light of my experience with the medicine, with with ayahuasca, is that we're all born as these golden little idols, and then all these stories are spray painted onto us. We're scratched and nicked up to forget who we truly are, right? These
Yeah,
very powerful beings, and you know, and then the world is, you know, explained to us in such a way that might make sense or kind of gives things order and structure and meaning, and of course when there's a unifying opinion, it allows, it creates safety, like a feeling of safety. But I love what you're saying, this analogy. It's perfect because that's what was coming up for me. We're born, we're here to do something, and when that story starts to change and when somebody else starts writing that story, we start living in fear. And, of course, that changes our perception of the world, it changes our behaviors, or it
yeah,
alters our story and our destiny. And then we live a terrible life, a life that others prey on and capitalize on, that doesn't necessarily serve, what I would refer to as our creator. And we end up in the world that we're living in.
yeah,
And it's amazing that people who have so much less material objects can be so much happier and so much healthier. I went to Nicoya, which is, what they call a blue zone, and the people there weren't even trying to live long. They weren't even
yeah,
trying to do all this bullshit that everyone's trying to do, like all the
yeah,
biohackers and, people who are taking like thousands of supplements a day and doing
yeah,
all these things. And I see them, like I see some very famous biohackers that look 20 years older than they actually are,
yeah,
and it's almost like the universe is kind of laughing back at them and saying, that's not how it works. But they're not getting the message, because
yeah,
they're so stuck in this material world. And as I've learned, and certainly will continue to learn, and it sounds like you've discovered, is that there's so much more than the material world. And even when it comes to health, I used to have a practice where we would do a lot of testing on people, and I came to realize that at one point we were ordering the most labs in all of Canada, and I wore that hat with pride, or that badge, or whatever you want to call it, with pride. And then I realized that it's the simple things that we can't even test for that are actually producing the most profound results for people. Like, there's no test for, do you love yourself? Do you love your children? Do you love your spouse? Do you love your parents? Do you have a connection with nature? Do you wake up at, before the sun comes up and greet the sun with love? And do you have compassion for other people? Like, there's no lab testing for that.
Right.
And so I kind of came to a very similar conclusion, that we're kind of wasting people's time, energy, and money doing all these unnecessary things and not really identifying what truly makes us healthy. So we went from ordering tons of labs to ordering very little, if any, labs at this point, and we're getting the best results we've ever gotten, without supplements and without labs. And it's just amazing to see that and witness that. And now this conversation is even further validation that we're on the right path.
Yeah, Pumpkin doesn't do any labs. And he doesn't take any supplements. He eats mice and he loves people and he hisses occasionally at somebody, if he's pissed. And he snuggles and he always when you feed him, he always rubs against you before he eats to say thank you. Always. It's and so and he's never had any issue. He just keeps going along. And but the thing is, he trusts himself. I'm the guardian of what's safe and not safe, and I'm going to rely on that and even work on that. That's what I think like doing ayahuasca in a way is you see, once you believe that you're the one who has to improve your ability to sense things, right? Then you have to work on it and like actually spend time with an animal or spend time with a plant or eat differently. And what does that do with how do I sense things? What if I fast? Do I sense more? Because then you're the one, you're not a victim anymore. I'm in control. I know I can manipulate the parameters here. I can eat this or I can eat that. I can walk more. I can sleep more. I can use red lights or white lights and see what I can sense then. But if you don't trust your senses, you're not going to get anywhere. That's what Pumpkin taught. You got to trust. I'm going with what I sense.
I'm curious what your take on wearables is, because wearables can provide us with kind of what I refer to as a short feedback loop to tell us, hey, this is working for you. I'm curious what your perspective is.
I would never put an electromagnetic device on my body ever. I
Hmm.
don't have a cell phone. I use a wired, like a cord computer, or it's like an Ethernet, I guess. That's the only device I have.
So, how is a clinician? Thank you. And I'll share a really fascinating story. So, when I was in the medicine, I wear an Aura ring. And the first day, I was experiencing what you might refer, and I'm going to take it off. So, I'm going to share a story. So, I'm in what you might describe as a sacred surgery. And I had this huge flower of life pointing at me, and it was scanning my body. And it got to my hands, and it said, "You brought an intruder,"
Yeah, right.
referring to the Aura ring. And so I immediately took it off, and I got the message loud and clear. And it said, no, you have to remove it from the Maloka, which is the room that we were in. So then I had to get up for my journey and literally walk outside the room, and drop my bag outside the room so that I could continue with the sacred surgery. And so that was really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a smart surgeon.
Yeah, yeah, that was quite a clear message that I got.
Yeah, I would
Eh,
never do that. I I I mean, I've fiddled around with like biogeometry things and I have I have all kinds of stuff and shungite and orgone and I
Oh,
don't know
same here.
if any of it works really, but I I we are electromagnetic beings. And if you're starting to put an electromagnetic device attached to your body, uh, that's a problem.
So it's altering, from what I'm gathering, it's altering the structure of the water in your body,
Yes,
which
exactly.
is then changing how the body, the information that it perceives from the ether, so to speak,
Yeah,
and then there's a consequence of that because
right,
we're changing the molecular
right. You
conformation and
make
structure
wonky
of it.
proteins then.
Hmm.
Wonky is a scientific term for, but
Uh,
that's if that's where you make you from, information essentially downloaded into the water. It's just like, Veda Austin's, you put, or a Masaru Emoto, you put love on a bottle and it changes the structure of the water. So that's the mediator between this electromagnetic world and the so-called physical world. And if you're putting information in there that's, not real from the world, you're going to create a man-made uh, structure. Now, that gets you into who's the man who made that structure. Somebody programmed that device, and I don't trust him.
hmm.
Neither does Pumpkin. He doesn't like wearing that stuff either, because we don't trust that. We don't even know that guy. Why would I believe him, trust him, or anything? I don't.
So I'm curious, speaking of trust and labs and devices and things like that, are there any markers that you evaluate on yourself, or are you living based on intuition?
My mother used to tell me, Tom, you have to get regular medical exams and tests, right? She was worried about me. That's like mothers. So I said, I do. The last time I had a medical exam, 1984, when I was started residency and they did a blood test. And I have one scheduled for 2034 with an old guy, so he might die. So then I'll have to cancel it. And 2094. So that's regular, right? It's every 60 years. And in the meantime, between 1984 and 2034, I don't go to doctors or do any tests.
I love that. I personally don't have a doctor. I have run some labs on myself, but I don't see
I
a
don't want to
doctor.
know.
Yeah, it's okay. I love that. I love that.
And
There's
because again, I'm, like Pumpkin, I'm banking on my ability to sense how I'm doing.
hmm.
And if I'm not doing well, I I want to be the one to sense it. Now, I could be wrong and I could have all kinds of things right now. But as far as it goes, I feel fine. I can do whatever I want. I don't have any days that I can't do what I want. And I'm going with that. And I think what if you do that, you end up getting better and better at it. Whereas if you outsource that, so somebody's going to tell me how I'm doing. The tendency then is to say, oh, I'll just wait and see what my A1C is, whether I eat too many, dried lingonberries, because I do actually. Um, but frankly, I don't care.
I love this. This is you're my kind of guy, man. You I hope that you sense that, but we're very much on the same wavelength. I think you know, I've always felt this way, but what you have like a few fingers in the conventional way of thinking just because and the only reason I got these labs actually was because they were gifted to me. So I didn't even actually
Yeah.
order them on my own accord. There's a company that I'm consulting for and they're like, hey, we want to run these labs on you so you can see our process. And so I went through the whole thing and everything came back really great. I'm happy to say. So I know I'm on the right path in terms of the way I live my life. And of course, there's always room for improvement. And the ring is a bye bye now. So thank you for that. And certainly got the message loud and clear from the grandmother medicine, and here you are kind of echoing that. So I appreciate that. You've
By the way, let me say something. I'm not saying necessarily that talking to somebody about how you're doing if things aren't going well, that's not a bad idea,
mhm.
particularly if the person has learned to believe in what you're telling them. And then that's what I did. I heard people's stories and I told it back to them. And then they hopefully they could say, so you think I should maybe not eat, 10 pounds of watermelon every day? Yeah, let's try it and see how you do. And that's the basis of our new biology clinic is we hear stories, we tell it back, and then hopefully we can give some suggestions of how you might go about doing better in this situation. And it is true that if you're not doing well, it's good to have somebody you can run that by. That I'm not saying against that. I haven't had to do that yet. And if I did, I would. But yeah.
Would you say that the majority of illness and disease is caused by people just living in a constant state of fear these days?
Well, amongst the psyops is that there are these things called diseases. They're not. There's your body's way of healing. You get a splinter in your finger, you make pus. The doctor says you have an infection. What you have is a strategy of getting the splinter out of your finger.
Hmm.
You you breathe in debris, you make cough to get it out. They call it bronchitis. You have a strategy to get rid of the cough. That you put debris in your house and you can't get rid of it. You put it in a bag, just like you would if somebody put garbage in your house, and you put that bag in your breast, and they call that cancer. But what you have is a strategy of coalescing debris so it's not all over your house. And then if you keep adding more debris, it goes to your spare bedroom and then the living room and then the kitchen. And they say it metastasized from your breast to there. And
Hmm.
I asked them then, so how did it get there? Through the bloodstream. Can you show it to me in the bloodstream? No. Why not? There's not enough to see in the blood. How do you know it got there? Well, how else did it get there? Right? So this is ridiculous. Like it's you put garbage in your house, you put it in the garage. You put more garbage and you put it in your spare bedroom. That means the garbage crawled from your garage to your spare bedroom. That's the level of thinking. And because we're getting near the end here, I want people to think. So because I've seen this before, that people listen to me and there's one side of them that says, you know what, I think this guy makes sense. And there's another side that says, no, this guy's an idiot because how can all these people be wrong? Right? There's like $1 trillion of geneticists out there and virologists. And so this guy in his sitting at home with his pajamas on is saying that everybody's full of it. It can't be. And so that's what you have to deal with.
Hmm.
And I would say when you're dealing with that, uh, I would forget about that part, like whether you think that I'm right or not. Like we started with parasites. Go find a study that proves that these protozoa exist and they cause disease. Like, don't believe me and and don't believe them either. Just go look for yourself, and I can guarantee you won't find it. And then you can see what you think after that. But the thing that gets people is this cannot be. It can't be as simple as this. Well, Tom, what caused Alzheimer's? Well, you take somebody and you stick them in a home with nothing to do and no good food, and they start making stuff up. That seems perfectly reasonable to me, right? Like that's what I would do. I would just start living in a fantasy world. And if I couldn't remember my wife's name, too bad. She's the one who stuck me in this home in the first place. So
Selective memory, right?
yeah. Anyways, that's what gets people. It can't possibly be this straightforward.
Well, Leonardo da Vinci said that the ultimate sophistication is simplicity.
Yeah.
And, I like to, think that, we can bring that back into wellness care, healthcare, whatever we want to call it. And that's what the world needs right now is simplicity. The body is sophisticated. It knows
Yeah.
what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Uh, but we've split our souls, so to speak, where we've removed that trust and that intuition and delegated that to somebody else who may not have our best interests at heart and may not even be operating with the right operating system to begin
Yeah.
with. And we're entrusting them with our most valuable asset, which is our health. And it's just quite unfortunate. So I'm very much in alignment with everything that you said today. And I just love that there's other people that think this way and are putting this message out there in the world. And I'm grateful that we were able to have this conversation. And I'm grateful that we can share this with others who would benefit from, just trusting themselves again, right? Just understanding that, you think about it, like our bodies literally built themselves, um,
Yeah, right.
and
It's
they're
like, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt because I am going to have to. It's like people say, isn't there anything that was true in medical school? And I say, yeah, the first day of medical school, guy gets up and says, just remember, the dumbest kidney is smarter than the smartest nephrologist. And it's true. Like a dumb kidney knows, you eat too much of this and it gets rid of it. A nephrologist doesn't know how to do that.
Oh man, I love that. So beautiful. So what a great way to end our conversation. Maybe we'll have another one if you're open to it. Thank you for your
Okay.
time today, Tom. And you know, wonderful that you're enlightening people and bringing this message out to the world. I'm sure you've taken a lot of arrows for it, and you continue to do it. So I'm grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you,
Thank you for having me. Hang in there.
thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.